Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about one of the biggest universities in the US recognizing caste as a protected category. We also talk about why people are not keen on joining the anti-terrorism squad. But first, we talk about LIC, that is the Life Insurance Corporation of India, which is the country's largest insurance firm and is owned by the government. Based on the draft papers that it has filed with the market regulators, the LIC plans to sell around 5% of its total equity through an initial public offering, that is an IPO. And after it is listed on the stock exchanges, there is a possibility that it could become India's most valuable listed company, the position which is right now held by the Reliance Industries Limited. Now, we had first heard about the LIC IPO in the Union Budget 2021 to 2022 when Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had announced it.
In 21-22, we would also bring the IPO of LIC, for which I am bringing the requisite amendments in this session itself. In the Atmanirbhar package, I had announced that we will come out with a policy of strategic disinvestment of public sector enterprises. I'm happy to inform the House that the government has the government has approved the said policy. The policy provides a clear roadmap for disinvestment in all non-strategic and strategic sectors.
Now, as you heard, the government did this as part of its disinvestment plans. And for those who may not remember, disinvestment essentially means the lowering of government stake in public sector enterprises. So in the case of LIC, the government is lowering its stake from 100% to about 95%. And the government can do this for various reasons, including to raise money. In this segment, Indian Express's Sunny Verma joins us to talk about LIC's initial public offering, how it is expected to help the government, and the challenges it will face in trying to attract investors. Sunny, to begin with, could you talk about how this decision came about and how will it benefit the government?
Yeah, decision, the finance ministers had earlier announced it in the budget that we'll come out with an initial public offer of the Life Insurance Corporation. So it is the largest and the first life insurer in the country. So decision was taken collectively by the government, and prior to filing the prospectus with the Securities and Exchange Board of India, the government held meetings at various levels with SEBI and Department of Investment and Public Asset Management and internally within the Finance Ministry. So that's how they thought that let's go about it, and it's a large IPO. So it'll also help the government in raising revenues, so to say. So they have in the budget revised estimate pegged about 78,000 crores of disinvestment receipt, of which they have so far raised about 12,000 crores. So the rest of the gap, this may help along with other issues that may come about.
Right, and the government has been looking at disinvestment for some time now. It was a big part of last year's budget, but this year, like you said, they reduced their target, which they can now meet through this IPO. But how much money can the government raise through this?
So government so far, we don't know the price band. So exact calculation wouldn't be possible to give, but there are various estimates in the market based on certain set of numbers that the government has put out in the LIC prospectus. Chief among them is the embedded value of the company, which is embedded value is basically the shareholders' net worth and future cash flows, which are discounted at present value. It estimates that, which is a key metric to value the company. So life insurers can quote at about a multiple of embedded value of 2:4. So embedded value has been estimated at around 5.4 lakh crores. So depending upon at what multiple the issue comes out, so it can range between say 10 lakh crore to maybe 15 lakh crore. That could be the valuation of the company, depending upon the price band chosen by the bankers closer to the IPO.
Okay, so say the valuation ends up being 10 lakh crore rupees. So for the 5% stake, the government will get around 50,000 crore rupees. And this, of course, all depends on when the actual price will be decided. But at a time when the government is low on revenue, when the fiscal deficit is high, what does 50,000 crore rupees mean to the government?
So it's a lot of money for the government because this is going to be the biggest fundraising from the primary market in the Indian equity market. So the largest is Paytm so far, which is a little under 20,000 crore rupees. So even for the government, it's valuable because they have, say, estimated 78,000 crore of disinvestment receipts. So 50,000, 60,000 crore, if they get from here, 12,000 crore they have already raised. So it'll obviously, they will be able to get closer to the target. Plus, you also have to see that this year the BPCL privatization hasn't happened. So from where government was expecting substantial money, but that hasn't happened. So I suppose this will help in bridging that gap.
Okay, so right now we spoke about the government. But how is LIC, the company itself, expected to gain from the IPO?
See, one key change happens that when you list on the exchanges, your compliances rise because every quarter you have to present your quarterly results and all other listing regulations, stock exchanges regulations, the regulations of the Securities and Exchange Board of India, you have to comply with. Every quarter you have to give a statement giving out how many investor complaints were there and how they were addressed. So in that sense, it helps in bringing about governance into the company because in unlisted companies, they may delay their annual reports or their books of accounts. So there is no question because only the government is there. With the external shareholders or also the institutional investors, there is sort of oversight that kicks in.
So does that mean that the functioning of the company might also improve?
In terms of regulatory compliances, yes. But at operational levels, whether the company, how they rejig their operations, whether they improve their operations, that we'll have to see. That we cannot say at the moment.
And one of the things that the government has also been trying to do is attract private investment. And this, I suppose, will be a test for that as well, right? Just testing investor appetite. So what are the factors that will affect the decision of investors buying LIC shares?
So basically the institutional player will look at the LIC numbers. So LIC numbers, one of the thing is that it's the largest life insurer in terms of market share. In terms of agent, it has a market share of about 75%. And in terms of premium, it has a share of about 66%. And its asset under management are about 39.6 lakh crore. So roughly about 40 lakh crore. So this is as on March 2021, as per data given by LIC itself. So the players will look at these numbers and how LIC is doing on profitability, because for the first 6 months, they have shown profits of 1,437 crore. So I hope they will take their decisions basis all this and what is the growth projection and what do they expect from it.
Right. And what are the challenges the government is expected to face in trying to raise the money it hopes to through this IPO?
See, challenge will basically be on the whether investors lap it up, because it's a big size issue and we don't have a history or a case study on that in the Indian context. Plus, say there are two companies in India currently, Reliance Industries and TCS, which have a market capitalization of 10 lakh crores plus. So RIL leads the charts, market cap of around 16 lakh crores and TCS at about rupees 14 lakh crore. So if they are valuing it at say 2.5 times of the embedded value, then it will be 10 lakh crore plus. But whether investors are willing to that kind of value, that we'll have to see. So one of the concerns that we hear is that the LIC so far has been low on profitability. So in 6 months, it has made a profit of 1,437 crores. But we are comparing the valuation with say RIL or TCS, which make annual profits of more than rupees 30,000 crores. So whether that becomes a hindrance or whether investors are willing to discount that and subscribe to the shares given the IPOs, that will have to see when it opens, the issue opens. So initial response shows by say looking at the number of demat accounts which are being opened prior to the LIC IPO that people are excited about it. But the profitability and other data shows us that we'll also have to take it with a pinch of salt.
Also, Sunny, in the past, we had seen two other government insurance companies launch their IPOs as well. Could you talk about those and what can be learned from how they have performed?
So the two IPOs of government insurance companies, not in the life insurance space, but one was a general insurance company. Another was a global reinsurer. So one is New India Assurance, another is GIC-RE. So these IPOs of these companies came some 5-6 years back. Both these companies have subsequently issued a bonus share in 1:1 ratio each, which means for one share you get an extra share as a bonus. So post bonus price, say issue price would be about 400 rupees for New India Assurance and about 450 to 460 rupees for GIC-RE investors. But today the prices for both of these companies is at around 130 rupees each. So there is a significant drawdown and a sharp fall in the price from the IPO levels, despite the markets having been run up. And these companies haven't really recovered and they are trading much below the issue prices. So that is a concern which I would want to highlight, because this is data. This is hard data. This is not a judgment or analysis. The data shows us that for the other two companies where the government came out with IPOs, the prices have fallen sharply. And besides the valuation, the other concern that concerns investors is the regulatory risk in government companies. It's a big risk.
And could you elaborate on this regulatory risk and give some examples related to it?
So regulatory risk is a big risk in government companies because government is ultimately the owner. Even if they say sell 5% shares to investors, they still own 95%, which means all the decision, although there is a board and all, are ultimately driven by the owner, which is the government in this case. So in the case of IRCTC, in a recent example, I'll show you the IRCTC IPO gave bumper gains. I mean, GIC and New India Assurance or the other end of the spectrum, where you couldn't even recover your initial money and the shares have languished since then, down by about more than 60-70% from the issue price. IRCTC is on the other end of the spectrum, where shares have trebled and maybe multiple times of the initial price. But from levels of 1300-1400, the shares cracked within no time to less than 700 rupees. In the case of IRCTC, because the Railway Ministry said that the IRCTC will, from say tomorrow on or within a few days, have to share the convenience fee with the Railway Ministry. So IRCTC charges convenience fee on all ticket bookings. It is the main source of revenue. It's the cash earner for the IRCTC. But government said you share with us. So the price discounted that. And since then the price have remained below, it remained muted and there is a downward momentum there. So that is example of regulatory risk. So that risk one has to be mindful of. Obviously, equity investment is always risky.
So I'm guessing this is something that investors keep in mind, that whatever the decision the government might take in the future for its own benefit, that could affect their investment in the company, right?
So I am just trying to point out the challenges which may arise. Now, it may also happen that, you may get bumper listing gains or the price could, rise multifold. So that possibility is also there because the market is always full of possibilities. But if say a company comes at a valuation of 10 to 12 lakh crore, it's a bit difficult to grow from there. IRCTC being a smaller company, you get multiples of your value. But for a big company where we are expecting, where the data tells us embedded value is 5.4 lakh crore and you are doing it at a multiple. So growing from there with a profit of 1437 crores in 6 months is difficult task. That's what I am trying to say. But you never know.
And next we talk about caste in the United States. Last month, the California State University, one of the largest universities in the US, announced that it had added caste as a protected category against discrimination. This happened after students from backward caste communities complained about the discrimination they have faced and then organized themselves to make this happen. But now, several Hindu right-wing groups in the US have criticized this decision, and caste is now emerging as a new battlefront on US campuses. In this segment, Indian Express's Sukrita Barua now joins us to talk about this. Sukrita, last month, the California State University added caste as a protected category. Could you begin by explaining what that means?
What this basically means is that the university has added caste to its anti-discrimination policy. So it essentially joins categories like race, gender, sexual orientation, color, ancestry, and so on in the university's policy. The policy which prohibits harassment and discrimination on the basis of these categories. And it goes on to detail how to report and get redressal in case of any kind of harassment on the basis of these categories. That's essentially what it means to be a protected category. You can claim harassment and discrimination against the university's policy. And with CSU doing this, it's binding on all 23 college campuses in California State University. And that's pretty huge because that's the largest 4-year public university network in the US.
Okay, so while earlier you could file a complaint and seek protection if you were being discriminated against based on your race or ethnicity, now you can also do this if you are being discriminated against based on your caste. But what prompted them to do this, considering that we mainly think of caste as an Indian problem? So what got one of the biggest universities in the US to do this?
Okay, so first off, the student organizers themselves are really emphatic about this not being an Indian problem and not being a Hindu problem, but a greater South Asian one. So in fact, the first push within the Cal State network came from a Nepali Dalit student whose name is Prem Pariyar, and he was a student in the social work department at UC East Bay. And he had actually sought asylum in the US from caste harassment in 2015. So he'd left Nepal in 2015 from caste harassment. And he says that even when he was in college, he found himself being bullied by dominant caste students in the college. Previous to joining CSU, he had worked in the restaurant industry. And there also he claimed that he experienced discrimination. So in 2020, he brought this up within his department in the college, and he got in touch with Equality Labs, which is the Dalit civil rights organization. He made presentations in his department, spoke to professors, and he got it included in the department's policy. And from there, it kind of went up the college's hierarchy and it got adopted at an all-college level. And from there, it just went on snowballing across these, different campuses on CSU, and many student organizers joined forces. And jump forward to summer 2021, there was a big public hearing, after which there's this body called the California State Student Association. Now, this association has reps from all the 23 campuses. So they passed a proposal and they decided to urge the Chancellor's office to adopt this at the university-wide level. So they went on to have a meeting with the Chancellor's office and managed to get them on board with this as well. So it's gone through several layers of democratic processes actually to get to where we are now. So it was a process spanning more than 1.5 years actually before it got adopted in the university's policy.
And, in trying to do this, in trying to get caste recognized as a protected category, what sorts of challenges did the students face?
So understandably, there were questions right from the start, like you mentioned, this is seen as a South Asian issues, and there would be questions about why are we talking about it in the US. So they were there from the start, and Prem had told me that when he was making his presentation, he was presenting his testimony before the college's academic senate, he said that there was a South Asian professor who asked at the meeting, why is this something that we're discussing at this level? It's an Asian problem. And he said that he was called upon to respond to that, and he did it. He spoke about his experiences and how he experienced caste harassment in the US itself, and that it was not remote for him. And I remember I had mentioned this hearing where, the California State Student Association had decided to take up caste protection policies. So that hearing had gone on for more than 3 hours apparently. And it is in that meeting that apparently a lot of voices, the student reps have said that these were right-wing voices. And they had spoken up and said that, this kind of policy is not necessary, or that claims of discrimination are untrue. So a lot of Dalit student networks had countered this during the hearing. And ultimately the student reps convinced that it is necessary.
And from what we know, the California State University isn't the only university in the US that has done this, right? Could you give examples of other universities that have also taken this step?
So there's a university called Brandeis University in Massachusetts, and they were the first to do this way back in 2019, not way back, but much earlier than the others. And then there's Colby College in Maine, which did this in 2020. It's also come up in Harvard University in a slightly different way. So there's this body called the Harvard Graduate Student Union. So they ratified a 4-year contract where there's a provision to add caste as, to add caste as a protected category. This is for all the graduate and undergraduate student workers at the university. So it's not the university's policy, but, strong stakeholders within that have pushed for caste protection frameworks as well.
And what sort of reaction have we seen since the California State University took this decision?
First of all, there's been a lot of positive responses. The negative responses primarily come from a set of professors from the CSU network, and they had written to the university against this. The California Faculty Association have also adopted a similar thing. So they had written to the Board of Trustees in CSU asking that this not be ratified. And I mean, at the end of it, it said that it's by 80 plus faculty members, but it didn't name any of these faculty members. And then the major organizational pushback has come from this group called the Hindu American Foundation. This is an American Hindu advocacy group, and they claim to not have any kind of political ties or to be affiliated with any political groups. But one of their co-founders, his name is Mihir Meghani. He is known to have been active in the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America's activities.
And what exactly is the argument of these groups that have been opposing this decision?
So the primary argument seems to be that this would lead to singling out of South Asians who are at the end of the day a minority in the US. So one of the arguments made by the Hindu American Foundation has been that this move would, I quote, make vulnerable and implicate only faculty of Indian and South Asian descent, given the fact that caste is singularly associated and falsely equated with Hindus, Indians, and to a lesser extent South Asians. And they've gone on to say that, I quote, it is going to create divisions where they simply do not exist. So this has been the bulk of what the criticism has been from this side. Interestingly enough, one of the major watershed movements in caste conversations in the US in general and in California in particular was what we know as the Cisco case. So the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing Regulators had sued Cisco and two of its employees back in 2020 for allegedly discriminating a Dalit engineer. And here too, the Hindu American Foundation had tried to intervene and they sought to file an intervention appeal. And there they had said that, the California department had said that caste is, I quote, a strict Hindu social and religious hierarchy, and they countered saying that this is inaccurate and unconstitutional and that it would lead to targeting of people of Indian origin.
Back in 2020, Tenmohi Sundararajan, the executive director of Equality Labs that Sukrita mentioned earlier, had appeared on the Sandeep Roy show. She had talked about the caste survey that her organization had conducted in the US, along with the kind of discrimination those from the Dalit community face in the country. Here's a short excerpt from that interview.
And some of the numbers for your listeners so that they know is 1 in 4 Dalits have faced some form of physical or verbal assault. 1 in 3 Dalits have experienced some form of discrimination in an educational institution. And 2 out of 3 Dalits have faced some form of workplace discrimination. Like just those 3 stats were shocking for us because they confirmed what we knew anecdotally, but we just didn't expect the rates to be higher, so high. And I think one question we always get when we say those stats is like, is that in India? And I was like, no, that's in the United States. I've heard over and over and over again that when Dalits are faced with hiring committees that are made up of Indians, they often will face a more hostile hiring process than if it's a hiring panel of just Americans. Once you're in the company, there is a consistent attempt for people to socially locate you on the basis of your caste. So, there's this joke about the Tambram Pat where men who, are wearing the sacred thread as Brahmins will gently kind of like pat or try to find that thread on other men that they meet for the first time to see if they are also Brahmin. And there was also another Dalit colleague who told me that he was at the lunchroom with colleagues from IBM, and the Brahmins who were working there were very loud in the canteen talking about how intelligence was innate to them. So the ideas of caste chauvinism and the ways that people who are dominant caste openly promote their caste identity, while Dalits are actively hiding their identity in order not to be found out and therefore excluded, is really quite poignant.
And in the end, we talk about the Anti-Terrorism Squad, or the ATS. It turns out that ATS is facing a crippling shortage of senior personnel. Several positions in this special police force have remained vacant for quite some time now. It has gotten to the point that the Director General of Maharashtra Police recently made a post on Facebook inviting officers who would like to join a posting. In this segment, Indian Express's Mohammad Thawar explains why people are so reluctant to join the ATS. Mohammad, the name makes it obvious, but could you explain the role of the anti-terrorism squad?
So, see, basically, anti-terrorism squad was set up in the early 90s. Initially, it was done to kind of take on the underworld in the city. After that, it was discontinued, but in the early 2000s, it was started again. And this time, its mandate was to kind of investigate terror cases, to look at blasts that had taken place across the state, to investigate them, to keep an eye on terrorist groups, to kind of develop intelligence using which they could prevent attacks, and also to kind of look at fake currency cases, because a lot of times fake currency and terror cases are linked. So broadly speaking, this was the mandate of the anti-terrorism squad.
Okay, so it seems like an important force and even one that is high profile. So why are people reluctant to join the ATS? And it's gotten to the point where officers are making Facebook posts about it.
Yeah, see, you've got to understand that initially, obviously, ATS in 2005, 6, 7, 8, like it was investigating really sensitive cases like the Malegaon blast cases and, other blasts across the state. And terror case, these are complex investigations. They require a level of sophistication. It requires cops who have background in investigation, because as compared to, let's say, investigating a murder case, in terror cases, you have people who are very adept at covering their tracks, etc. So it was a thing of pride for police officers to be associated with the ATS, and especially given that it was investigating all these sensitive cases, it was a matter of pride. But I think things kind of started changing after the 26/11 terror attacks in Mumbai. There was the formation of the National Investigation Agency. Now, the National Investigation Agency was also asked to cover terror attacks, but this was across the country and it was a federal agency. Now, what happened is the mandate, or the charter like they call it, the charter of investigation for the NIA and the ATS overlapped on a lot of issues. So, like even the NIA was asked to investigate terror cases, NIA was asked to investigate fake currency. So post that, what started happening is that, especially in the past few years, that any major terror attack case or any important case that ATS would normally have investigated started being taken up by the NIA, which also left a lot of ATS officials demotivated, because you work on a case for 6 months and suddenly at the end of it, NIA comes and takes over that. So that's the reason also some of the people felt that ATS was not what it used to be. NIA has become a premier investigating agency. So that is one of the main reasons why it has lost its sheen over the past few years, with it kind of, you could say, working in the shadow of the NIA.
And what do officials say about how this affects countering terrorism itself, having two agencies and cases being shifted like this?
Yes, see, so officials talk about a couple of things. See, one factor is also the fact that in center you have the BJP and in Maharashtra you have the Mahavikas Aghadi. What officials told me is that if there is the same government in the center and the state, there is still some cooperation and coordination on the government level. So, for example, an ATS chief can tell the CM that, we are investigating this case and we are making progress. Can we ask NIA to not get into that? But now, because already you have two governments that whose relationships are fraught, so that kind of complicates matters further, where there is no sense of coordination. And as far as this having an impact on terror cases, as such, it doesn't make sense to have two organizations who kind of have the same mandate. Because if the NIA is also looking at this and the ATS is looking at the same thing, you'd rather utilize your resources in a better manner, because you've got to understand that a lot of these terror agencies have some very good infrastructure, good softwares, and a lot of good facilities that could be used more productively, rather than two agencies working or using their resources up on the same thing. So some officers said that maybe they could delineate or work out nuances in the functioning of both agencies, where they can define that, okay, this you are supposed to do, this you're supposed to do. It will make their job much more simpler without any, duplication of work.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.